My name is Julia Foster, and at 26 years old, on my birthday, my parents humiliated me in front of 35 relatives, handed me a 121K bill, and fired me. They thought they won, but I'm not done yet. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. I never thought a day I'd been looking forward to for months would turn into a nightmare. My 26th birthday was supposed to be a celebration, a rare moment when my parents, Clara and John, might show a sliver of pride or warmth. Instead, it became the stage for the most humiliating, calculated attack I've ever endured. The house smelled faintly of lilies and overpriced candles, the sort of scent that screamed family perfection, but the tension in the air was almost tangible. 35 relatives had gathered, chatting politely, sipping wine, and laughing at jokes I didn't make. I clutched my purse a little too tightly and forced a smile as my mother glided past, her eyes sharp, calculating, unreadable. "Happy birthday, Julia," she said, her tone saccharine, as if we were actors in a play where I hadn't memorized my lines. My father, John, smirked from the corner of the living room, holding an envelope like it contained a gift. But I could feel it. The weight of something coming that would twist the day into chaos. My sister Sophia whispered something in my father's ear, and he nodded. That's when I noticed it. The glances, the subtle smirks, the way my parents never looked at me, the way they looked at anyone else in the room. The cake appeared. It was enormous, extravagant, layered with pink frosting and topped with my age and gold numbers. Everyone clapped, the cameras flashed, and I forced my usual "thank you," my voice shaking just a little. But then, the envelope. "Open it, Julia," my father said, voice calm but final, like a judge delivering a verdict. I tore it open. Inside was a bill. My jaw dropped. My hands shook. $121,000. $121,000, neatly itemized for parenting services, guidance, emotional support, and educational expenses. I stared at him. This is a joke, right?" "Absolutely not," my father said. "You've benefited from everything we've given you. It's time to settle your debts. Pay this by the end of the month or you're cut off, completely." The room went silent. 35 people watched me, their eyes wide, whispers spreading like wildfire. My mother, standing beside him, folded her hands elegantly and added, "We've always wanted what's best for you, Julia. This is for your own good." For my own good. The words rang hollow, venomous, and cruel. I tried to process it. 35 relatives, all watching. My face burned, my chest tightened. And then Sophia, ever eager to prove her loyalty to our parents, stepped forward. "And your car," she said sweetly. "We'll hold on to it until you pay. You can't drive anywhere until this is settled." I felt the world tilt sideways. My life, my freedom, my dignity, everything stripped away in one calculated move. And then the ultimate betrayal. Ethan, my boyfriend of 3 years, standing quietly in the corner. His eyes avoided mine, darting to my parents instead. Later I would learn he had been convinced, or coerced, to side with them in this. My boyfriend, my partner, my supposed ally. I tried to speak. "You can't do this. This is your responsibility," my father interrupted, cutting me off mid-sentence. "We're giving you every chance. Don't test our patience." And with that, my humiliation was complete. I felt smaller than I had ever felt. The laughter, the whispers, the shocked expressions of relatives all blended into a haze of shame. I left the living room, clutching the envelope like it was a weapon against me. Alone in the hallway, I pressed my back against the wall, fighting the urge to collapse. My mind raced. They think this will break me. They think I'll beg, cry, submit. But here's the thing about me. I've survived worse. I took a deep breath, feeling the first flicker of anger ignite in my chest. Not fear, not despair. Anger. Sharp, cold, precise. I would not let them win. Not this time. I knew I had to move carefully. Every phone call, every interaction, every family member would be scrutinized. I would need evidence, documentation, allies, and yes, revenge. But not the reckless, emotional kind. No, the kind that dismantles them piece by piece while I remain untouchable. I looked back at the living room through the narrow crack in the doorway. The cake sat there, candles flickering, mocking me. 35 people, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit their carefully curated world. This wasn't just a birthday, this was a declaration, a test. And Julia Foster? I never fail my tests. After the party, the house felt emptier than it ever had, even though 35 relatives had been packed into it only hours before. I closed the door behind me, the sound of the lock clicking into place echoing like a small victory. My chest was still tight, my hands trembling, but my mind had already shifted into focus mode. I sank onto the edge of my bed, clutching the $121,000 bill as if it were both a challenge and a declaration. They think this will break me, I thought again. They're about to find out how wrong they are. The first step was obvious. Evidence. My parents were meticulous, almost surgical in their attempts to control me. I would need proof of everything: phone calls, messages, financial records, receipts, anything that could show their manipulation. I pulled my laptop closer and began combing through old bank statements. Every gift they had given me was meticulously logged. Tuition payments, car maintenance, travel expenses, hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into my accounts over the years, and now they were demanding it back, packaged as a lesson in responsibility. I opened my email and began organizing the evidence into folders, labeling everything: transactions, correspondence, manipulation. Each piece I collected fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for the money, they wanted control, and I was done giving it away. Then there were the calls. My phone had been blowing up since Friday. 54 missed calls from my mother, 45 from my father, and 28 from my sister. Each notification was a drumbeat of intimidation, a reminder that they thought they could push me into submission. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I drafted a plan. Step 1. Document everything. Every call I answered, every text I received, every threat or attempt at manipulation would be recorded. If they thought they could bully me into paying, they were wrong. Step 2. Cut unnecessary ties. People in the extended family who had been complicit, gossiping, watching, laughing, I would isolate them. Their knowledge of my actions would be controlled. Step 3. Strike smart, not emotional. I wasn't going to lash out blindly. This was about strategy. If they were going to publicly humiliate me, I would respond with quiet, undeniable power, proof, documentation, legal leverage. I felt the first true spark of clarity. I wasn't helpless. They had made a tactical error by underestimating me. By the time they realized it, I would already be several steps ahead. The next morning, my phone vibrated incessantly. Messages from my mother flooded in. Julia, pick up. We need to talk. Don't be difficult. My father's texts were colder, demanding. Payment deadline is firm. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I ignored them. Instead, I began mapping out my next moves. I contacted a financial advisor under the pretext of personal budgeting and started reviewing the legality of the bill. Could they actually demand repayment like this? What avenues did I have if I refused? The more I dug, the more I realized how vulnerable they had made themselves. Every transaction, every family gathering, every loan they had graciously given me. There were loopholes, technicalities, and leverage points. I had always suspected my parents were manipulative, but this level of calculation was almost impressive. Almost. I also considered my social network. I had friends who could testify to my independence, my integrity, and the fact that my parents' narrative of indebtedness was fabricated to humiliate me. Allies would be crucial. By evening, I was no longer just angry. I was precise, calculating, and resolute. My parents had thrown me into the arena, expecting tears and submission. Instead, I had built my strategy, lined up my resources, and quietly prepared for a counterstrike. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. The world outside felt calm, indifferent to my family's games, but inside I was planning. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to rewrite the rules. And I knew one thing for certain: I would never let them humiliate me like that again. The first move would be small, something subtle, something that would let them know I wasn't afraid. The bill wouldn't disappear overnight, but their control over me would. Step by step, they would realize the error of underestimating me. As I shut my laptop for the night, I felt a strange exhilaration. Fear had been replaced with determination, humiliation replaced with strategy. I wasn't done. I was only beginning. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, my mind already racing. I reviewed the files I had compiled the night before, spreadsheets of payments, screenshots of messages, and a detailed timeline of every interaction that could prove my parents' overreach. Each piece of evidence was a weapon. I decided to start small. My first target wasn't the $121,000 bill, it was their perception. They had humiliated me in front of 35 relatives, assuming that public shame would make me bend. That was their first mistake, underestimating my patience, my precision, and my resolve. I began by responding to the texts, not with anger, not with denial, but with calm, measured neutrality. I've received your messages, I am reviewing everything, and will respond accordingly. It was infuriating to them. They wanted tears, panic, submission. Instead, they got silence punctuated by control. Next, I contacted my lawyer, framing it as a routine inquiry about family financial obligations. I didn't reveal my full hand yet. I just asked the questions that would start putting my parents on edge. Could they legally demand repayment? Did they have any documented agreement beyond mere verbal claims? What if I refused outright? While waiting for the lawyer's response, I turned my attention to the people who had been involved in the party. Relatives who had cheered them on, who had whispered, who had laughed. They were now part of the narrative I could leverage. I made a list of who had witnessed what, who could be persuaded to testify that their actions were manipulative rather than supportive. By mid-afternoon, the first cracks started to appear. My mother called, and I let it ring. My father sent a text. "Julia, this is urgent. Answer now." I didn't. Every unanswered call, every ignored text was a small victory. They were losing control, and I could see it already. Then the lawyer called. Her voice was calm but firm. "From what you've described and the documents you've provided, they have no legal ground to demand repayment. At best, they could file a civil suit, but you have substantial evidence to contest it." I felt a thrill run through me. I wasn't just prepared, I was untouchable, and this was just the beginning. I spent the evening strategizing my next move. I decided that I would escalate subtly, letting them feel that their authority was slipping, one step at a time. I drafted a detailed message summarizing my evidence, but I didn't send it yet. It was too early. Timing, after all, was everything. Instead, I used the night to prepare for the psychological battle. My parents thrived on guilt, on emotional manipulation. I had to show no weakness, reveal no panic, and never let them feel they had the upper hand. I also began documenting their responses, not just what they said, but how they said it. Tone, frequency, urgency, all of it would later serve as proof that their actions were coercive and manipulative. By bedtime, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The first stage of my plan was in motion. I wasn't just defending myself, I was setting the stage to reclaim the narrative entirely. And deep down, I knew one truth that I hadn't admitted to myself before. I was finally enjoying being in control. The next morning, I sent my first deliberate move, a carefully worded email to my parents, professional and cold. I've reviewed all communications and documents regarding the recent bill. I have compiled all relevant financial records, including payments and transactions you provided. I am willing to discuss any legitimate concerns in a formal, structured setting. Please refrain from further calls or messages until then. Almost immediately, I received frantic calls. I ignored them. Their desperation was a tangible thing I could almost touch. They had expected submission, and instead they were faced with calm, calculated resistance. By the end of the day, I had arranged a meeting with a mediator, someone impartial who could witness any interaction and document it officially. The idea was simple: remove the emotional chaos and replace it with a neutral, controlled environment where I held the upper hand. As I hung up the phone, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The game had begun, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting, I was orchestrating. Every move, every message, every document was a calculated step toward reclaiming my autonomy. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this. Once the plan fully unfolded, my parents would wish they had never humiliated me in front of those 35 relatives. The day of the mediation arrived, crisp and gray, the kind of morning that carried tension in the air. I arrived early, armed with folders neatly labeled, each containing evidence of the absurd $121,000 demand, copies of every text, email, and payment record. My parents were already there, hovering by the entrance, their faces a mixture of indignation and impatience. I walked in calmly, letting my presence command the room. My mother's eyes flickered with annoyance at my composed demeanor. My father's jaw tightened, the muscle pulsing with the effort of keeping control. I had seen this act before, both of them projecting confidence, but it was fragile, brittle even. The mediator greeted us and asked for opening statements. I let my parents go first. My mother's voice quivered slightly as she accused me of ingratitude. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you respond?" My father chimed in, more measured, but still defensive. "We're just asking for what's fair, Julia. You owe us that much." I listened quietly, letting their words hang in the room like smoke. Then it was my turn. "I've reviewed every transaction, every payment, and every communication," I began, my voice steady, carrying authority. "The bill you issued on my birthday does not align with any legal agreement or documented obligation. I have compiled all relevant evidence. I am here to resolve legitimate concerns in a structured, fair manner, but baseless accusations and attempts at intimidation will not influence this process." A hush fell over the room. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected tears, apologies, capitulation. They had not expected calm, control, and preparation. The mediator leaned forward, skimming through my documents. She nodded slightly. "Everything here seems well documented. It appears we can proceed with reviewing the facts rather than emotions." I let a small, satisfied smile play at the corners of my lips. The shift in energy was palpable. The mediator had subtly shifted the balance. The room was no longer my parents' arena. It was neutral ground. As we went through each item, my parents' defensiveness became more apparent. My mother tried to interject with emotional appeals. "But we spent so much on your education, your upbringing." I allowed her to speak, then calmly countered with specifics, exact tuition payments, dates, and receipts that showed I had covered certain costs myself. Every attempt to guilt me was neutralized by evidence. My father, normally the stern enforcer, grew increasingly frustrated. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on the table. "Julia, you're making this unnecessarily complicated." "I'm making this accurate," I replied evenly. "Complications arise from baseless claims, not thorough review." The tension was delicious in its clarity. I realized then that the humiliation they had inflicted, so public, so dramatic, was now being turned on its head. Every document I presented, every fact I cited, chipped away at the illusion of their authority. Hours passed. They argued, stumbled, and contradicted themselves. I remained composed. The mediator occasionally nodded at me, subtly affirming the credibility and orderliness of my presentation. By the end of the day, a resolution began to take shape. My parents could see that their emotional manipulation held no sway. Their bill would be dismissed unless they could provide legal documentation, which they could not. The realization hit them hard. The authority they thought they wielded crumbled in a controlled, methodical way. When we left the mediation, the air was heavy with defeat, on their side. My parents avoided looking at me, their usual composure replaced by thinly veiled irritation. But I felt no gloating, no triumph in their embarrassment. The satisfaction was quieter, subtler. Justice served calmly and strategically. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange sense of liberation. This wasn't just about the $121,000, or the birthday humiliation, or even the 35 relatives who had witnessed the spectacle. This was about reclaiming my autonomy, proving that I was not beholden to emotional coercion, and that I could defend myself without sacrificing dignity. For the first time, I understood the depth of my own strength. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was a turning point, not just in my relationship with my parents, but in how I would approach the rest of my life. I glanced at my phone. There were dozens of missed calls and messages. I ignored them. Their urgency, their panic, was now background noise. I had moved from victim to orchestrator, and every step I took from here on would reinforce that control. The battle was far from over, but the rules had changed. And for the first time, I wasn't just playing defense, I was setting the terms. The day after the mediation, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Missed calls, texts, voicemails, they were everywhere. Clara's messages were frantic, John's were terse, and Sophia's were tinged with confusion and betrayal. I didn't answer. I had learned that engagement only fueled their attempts at control. Instead, I sat down with a fresh cup of coffee, reviewing my next move. The legal documents, receipts, and correspondence were all neatly organized. Every time I looked at them, a plan formed. Their pride and rage were now predictable. They would escalate, try to intimidate, or attempt public humiliation. But this time, I had the advantage: preparation and foresight. That evening, my inbox pinged. An email from Sophia. "Julia, can we talk? I don't understand what's happening." I hesitated, then typed back calmly. "We can talk, but only if we communicate respectfully and focus on facts, not guilt or accusations." It was a small olive branch, but strategic. Sophia was young, impressionable, and conflicted. She could either be an ally or a pawn. I decided she would be an ally. By the next morning, my parents had begun their retaliatory campaign. They sent out subtle social media posts hinting at my supposed financial irresponsibility, trying to rally extended family members. They even contacted a distant relative who had influence over one of my business partnerships, attempting to spread misinformation. I discovered their tactics quickly, thanks to alerts I had set up for mentions of my name online. I documented everything: every post, every call, every misleading message. It was meticulous work, but I realized then that I had transformed from target to observer, mapping their every move. Then came the moment that changed everything. I received a package at my door, a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were scanned copies of bank statements, receipts, and emails my parents had assumed I hadn't seen. They had tried to weaponize my finances against me, thinking I would be caught off guard. Instead, I smiled. This was ammunition. I compiled a detailed chronological dossier that not only refuted their claims, but exposed inconsistencies in their own story. Every dollar they had claimed I owed could now be traced and disproven. I decided to escalate, not publicly, not yet, but strategically. I sent a formal letter, carefully worded, to each family member involved, including Sophia, detailing the inaccuracies, the evidence, and the potential legal consequences of spreading false claims. I kept my tone firm but professional. The effect was immediate. My parents' social media posts vanished, withdrawn without explanation. Messages stopped, calls dwindled. The tension was suffocating for them, and I remained entirely calm. It was then that I realized the true power of documentation, preparation, and emotional detachment. I had transformed the tables completely. What had started as humiliation and betrayal became a lesson in control, strategy, and long-term planning. By the end of the week, my parents reached out, their tone drastically different. Clara's voicemail was shaky, almost pleading. "Julia, we think we need to talk privately." I listened silently and then deleted the message. I wasn't yet ready to respond. Their apology, or what might masquerade as one, would have to come on my terms, not theirs. For the first time, I felt a mix of vindication and liberation. The birthday humiliation, the $121,000 demand, the public spectacle, it was no longer a threat. It had become a catalyst, a turning point in my life. I had survived their worst, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more in control than ever. That night, I looked out my window, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. I thought about everything I had endured, the family I had been forced to confront, and the future I would now carve for myself. The storm had passed, but the lessons remained. Never underestimate preparation, the power of evidence, or the strength that comes from maintaining composure under pressure. And deep down, I knew one thing: this was only the beginning. The following morning, I woke to an empty house and a rare moment of silence. The quiet was almost surreal after the chaos of the past week. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat at my desk reviewing my dossier one last time. Every email, every receipt, every text message was cataloged, cross-checked, and ready. I had turned the tables entirely. I decided it was time to act. Not impulsively, but deliberately. I began reaching out to key contacts: my attorney, a trusted friend in finance, and a mediator who had handled similar high-stakes family disputes. Each conversation was precise, focused, and intentional. I wasn't seeking revenge, I was asserting boundaries and protecting my life. Then came the first breakthrough. Sophia, my sister, finally responded after days of silence. Her message was tentative, almost apologetic. "Julia, I've read everything you sent. I I didn't know. I feel so confused. Can we meet? I replied carefully, we can meet, but only if we focus on truth, not pressure or manipulation. The meeting was quiet at first. Sophia was nervous, unsure of what I expected. I simply laid out the facts, showing her the evidence of her parents' attempts to manipulate and mislead her. Her expression changed gradually, from confusion to disbelief to a dawning understanding. I never realized, she whispered. It's not your fault, I said softly, but it's your choice now. You can decide who to trust and what to believe, and I hope you choose wisely. Sophia nodded, tears brimming. For the first time, I felt a subtle shift, not just in her, but in the balance of power within the family. My parents' influence was eroding, quietly, without confrontation. That evening, I focused on myself. I drafted plans for financial independence, personal projects, and even long-delayed travel. The freedom I had fought for was no longer theoretical, it was tangible. The weight of their demands, the burden of their control, had lifted. But the final move, the one that would secure everything, was still ahead. I had to confront the ultimate source of their power, the network of relatives and acquaintances they had tried to manipulate. Carefully, I began sending neutral updates, subtle truths about the situation, framed in a way that emphasized clarity, fairness, and transparency. The response was immediate. Friends and extended family began questioning my parents' motives. Messages that had once supported them now expressed concern, curiosity, and doubt. Their carefully crafted narrative was unraveling. And then the call came from my parents. John's voice was tight, restrained, almost unrecognizable. Julia, can we meet? I paused, letting silence hang for a moment. Then I replied evenly, deliberately. Only when you are ready to speak honestly, without threats, manipulation, or false accusations. Until then, we are done. I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt entirely untethered. Not angry, not vengeful, not afraid. I was free. The storm my parents had tried to unleash had dissipated, leaving me stronger, more resilient, and entirely in control of my own life. I sank into my chair and reflected. Every humiliating moment, every demand, every threat had been a test of endurance, and I had passed, not by reacting, but by preparing, observing, and acting with precision. The night stretched on, calm and expansive. The city lights flickered like distant promises, each one a reminder that life could be reclaimed, rebuilt, and reshaped, not according to the expectations of others, but according to my own terms. And in that quiet, I made a vow. I would never again allow anyone, no matter how close, to dictate the terms of my happiness, my success, or my dignity. This was my life, my rules, my victory. The morning sunlight spilled across my living room, but the calm it brought felt fragile. I knew that today might finally bring the confrontation I had been preparing for months. My phone buzzed, another call from my parents. I ignored it. Their urgency no longer frightened me. It merely reminded me how much power I had reclaimed. By late afternoon, they arrived. Clara and John stepped into the house, faces carefully composed, but their eyes betrayed the tension. I stood at the top of the stairs, calm, poised. For the first time, I felt like the observer in a scene that had once been mine to endure. Julia, John began, but I raised a hand. Let's skip the pleasantries. I want honesty, no excuses, no manipulation, and no anger from me. You will not see me intimidated. Clara's lips pressed tightly. We wanted to talk. I nodded slowly. Good. Then let's talk about facts. About every demand, every humiliation, every attempt to control me. Your attempts to leverage family gatherings, money, and threats, they've all been documented. They exchanged glances, realizing the gravity of my tone. I won't lie, I continued. You hurt me deeply, but I also learned something. Your control is only as strong as I allow it to be, and I'm done allowing it. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across their faces. They tried to interject, to shift blame, but I cut them off. Every word I spoke was deliberate, every pause measured. I laid out the evidence I had gathered, the messages, the receipts, the calls. I explained how Sophia had begun to see the truth and how extended family had started questioning their motives. The house was silent, the weight of truth pressing down on all of us. My parents finally understood. They were no longer in control. Clara's voice trembled. We didn't mean for it to go this far. I shook my head slowly. Intent doesn't erase impact, but it does create responsibility, and responsibility means change. Then Sophia walked in. She had come to witness this moment, to see firsthand what honesty looked like. She stood beside me, not defiantly, but with quiet solidarity. "Mom, Dad," she said softly, her voice steady. "I want to understand what happened, but I also want the truth, and I think Julia's shown me what that looks like." The room shifted. My parents were confronted not just by me, but by the daughter whose opinion mattered most. Their carefully constructed defenses were crumbling. After an hour of measured, tense dialogue, the meeting ended. My parents left, stunned, muted, and stripped of their usual confidence. For the first time, they had no leverage, no influence, and no ability to dictate my life. I closed the door behind them and exhaled. The battle was over. Victory wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity, boundaries, and reclaiming my own life. That evening, I sat with Sophia and reflected on everything. We laughed, we cried, we shared memories and plans for the future. For the first time in years, the family dynamic felt genuine, not forced, not manipulated. Weeks later, my parents tried to reach out again. This time, I responded calmly. "We can speak, but only respectfully. Anything else is unacceptable." And that was the end of their attempts to control me. I had been humiliated, exploited, and undermined, but I had turned every blow into strength. I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my freedom. Standing at my window that night, I looked out over the city lights, a quiet smile on my face. For so long, I had allowed others to define my worth. No more. From now on, I would define it myself. The phone buzzed, a message from Sophia. "Thank you for everything, for showing me what strength looks like." I smiled, typing back. "You always had it. You just needed to see it reflected." And in that moment, I knew. The past was behind me, the future was mine, and nothing, not even my family, could take my life or my happiness from me again.